Our lesson tonight is taken from Revelation 2 and verse 10. Here Jesus is warning the church at Smyrna, and he says, "Fear none of those things which thou shalt suffer. Behold, the devil shall cast some of you into prison, that you may be tried, and ye shall have tribulation 10 days. Be thou faithful unto death, and I will give thee a crown of life." The persecution was to be orchestrated by Satan, and it was to be directed at these people to assault their faith. And the Lord exhorts them to be faithful regardless of what is to come. Faithfulness is an oft-repeated theme in the Bible. Jesus said in Luke 9 and verse 62, "No man, having put his hand to the plow and looking back, is fit for the kingdom of God." Luke says of the early church in Acts 2 and verse 42, they continued steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine. These Christians had staying power. They could be counted on. We are repeatedly told to stand fast in the faith. 1 Corinthians 16 and verse 13. Stand fast in the Lord. Philippians 4 and verse 11. In Ephesians 6 and verse 13, Paul adds, "Take up the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand." After his great treatise on the resurrection, Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15 and verse 58, "Therefore, my beloved brethren, be ye steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord." And then he adds in 1 Corinthians 4 and verse 2 that it is required in stewards that a man be found faithful. Now, just about anybody can start out well, but there are few who stay long enough to finish well. And that's why the reminder to the church at Smyrna is so important. He was addressing a group of people that were facing severe persecution. He said, "Some of you are going to be cast into prison because of your faith." And so they needed a word of encouragement in order that they might remain faithful. I don't think that we face the same types of tribulation that they had to endure, but the fact is that we have difficulties in remaining faithful to the Lord. With the help of God, however, we can be faithful. And really, that's all that is required of us. It's significant to me that Jesus did not say, "Well done, thou good and rich servant." He did not say, "Well done, thou good and successful servant," but he said, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant." There are some prizes that you and I can never win. We're never going to be able to attain sinless perfection. We're never going to be able to answer all of life's questions. We're not going to be able to solve all of life's problems, but we can be faithful. And really, that's all that matters. What does it mean to be faithful? We have a definition of faith in Hebrews 11 and verse 1. There the apostle says, "Faith is the conviction about those things that are unseen. It is the confidence of receiving the things for which you hope." What about you? Are you convicted about our unseen God? Are you convicted that He is indeed the Creator, as is mentioned in Genesis 1 and verse 1? That He has revealed Himself in the creation, Psalm 19 and verse 1. And that the Word, are you convicted about His Word, and that in which He has revealed Himself, and He has revealed Himself uniquely in the gift of His only begotten Son? Do you believe and are you confident that He is our sustainer, and that it is in Him that we live and move and have our very being, and that every good gift and every perfect gift comes down from above? Acts 17, verse 20, James 1 and verse 17. Are you convinced that He loves you and that He wants what is best for you insofar as your eternal well-being is concerned. And you know, sometimes we're not really sure what's best for us. And therefore, when we make requests of Him, He knows what's in our best interest. He sees the big picture. And that's the reason that we trust Him and we acknowledge not our will, but Thy will be done. And then are you convicted about His Son? We're told in Philippians 2 and verse 5 that the pre-existent Christ was equal to God the Father, but He emptied Himself of the form of God and became one of us, became a servant, died upon the cross of Calvary, taking the punishment that we deserve because of our sins, and then, of course, rising and then being exalted to the right hand of God. What about His Word? Are you convicted that it is truly inspired as it claims for itself in 2 Timothy 3 and verse 16? There the Apostle Paul says, all Scripture is given by the inspiration of God. In other words, it is God-breathed. And he says it is profitable for doctrine. In other words, what is right. For reproof, what is not right. For correction, how to get right. And for instruction in righteousness, how to stay right. Are you convinced of that? It's referred to, that body of teaching given to us by inspiration, as the faith. Paul said before he was executed in 2 Timothy 4 and verse 7, I have kept the faith. And that meant he lived his life according to those words. He had lived by the rules, if you will. And then Jude says in verse 3 that we should earnestly contend for the faith. And so, to be faithful, we believe in God. We believe that He is the creator of all things. We believe He is our sustainer. And we believe that He loves us and that He wants what is in our best eternal well-being. We believe in Jesus Christ, that He died, was buried, and rose again the third day and has been exalted by God in heaven. And we believe that the Bible is His inspired word. It is the faith, and we live our lives in compliance with it. But notice now, Jesus warns us that the devil is relentless and he will assault our faith. There is an interesting scene, and I think, one that is very revealing, that's recorded in Matthew the 26th chapter, Mark 14, Luke 22, John the 14th chapter. It's a narrative about the Lord on the night of His betrayal and His arrest. And He's gathered in an upper room with His disciples, and it has been prepared. He's there for the purpose of observing the Passover. And a lot of things took place on that evening. In fact, everything in the Gospel of John from chapter 13 through chapter 17 took place that evening. And in that room, the Lord instituted the communion. He told them that He was getting ready to leave them. He was going to go away. He shocked them by telling them that one of them was a traitor. And probably shocked all of them, with the possible exception of Judas. And it may have shocked Judas that he knew it. And you remember they cried out, Lord, is it I? Is it I? Is it I? And then He said, all of you are going to deny me tonight. And of course that shocked them as well. And He meant all of them, including Peter. Peter was the obvious leader of this group. And no doubt the others thought to themselves, well, you know, if Peter denies Him, there's a good chance that we may succumb as well. Peter, however, spoke up and argued. He said, I'll never deny you. I will die with you, but I will never deny you. And Jesus told him specifically, and really he said, according to our text here, he said in Mark the 14th chapter, well again, Matthew 26, Luke 22, John 14, he says, Simon, Simon, indeed, Satan has asked for you. Do you think that didn't send a chill up Peter's spine? That he may sift you as wheat. But that's pretty mysterious to me. But you know, it's as though the Lord kind of lifts the veil and he gives us a glimpse of something going on in the invisible realm. And there is an invisible realm. We've already given the definition of faith. Faith is the conviction about those things that are unseen. And he said, in the invisible realm, that Satan has asked God for you, Peter. You know, it's pretty reminiscent of a similar episode in the Old Testament in the book of Job. In the first couple of chapters in the book of Job, God and Satan are conversing, and God asks Satan, he says, have you considered my servant Job? There is none like him on earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and shuns evil. And Satan retorts, well, sure, he is obedient to you. He's, faithful to you. I mean, that's because of the blessings that you give him. He knows where those are coming from. And he said, in addition to that, you've got a hedge built around him, and I can't get to him. He said, but if you give him to me, I will have him curse you to your face. Job 1 and verse 12, God says to Satan, all that he has is in your power. That's pretty remarkable to me. All that he has in your power. Now, he had been considering Job, and he's considering you and me as well. His malignant eye is forever searching the saints of God, looking for the weak link in the chain, the weak door in the fortress to break in. And yet, there is not a hair on Job's head, not a hair on the back of his camel that Satan can touch without God's permission. Paul says something to the same effect in 1 Corinthians 10 in verse 13. He said, there is no temptation that has overtaken you except such as is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted above that which you are able, but will with the temptation also make a way to escape that you may be able to bear it. God has veto power. Well, Satan asked for permission to have the apostles, and Jesus explains that the reason that he wants them is to sift them as wheat. Wheat has to be sifted. It has to be winnowed in order to separate the grains of wheat from the dirt, straw, and chaff. Now, in ancient days, the wheat would be poured into a giant sieve, or it would be poured onto a large screen filter, and then the filter would be shaken violently in hopes that the tiny grains of wheat would fall through the openings in the screen to the pile below, while the dirt clods, strawy, and chaffy stuff would remain on the screen. Well, Jesus uses this as an analogy. He says Satan has asked God for permission to sift you, to shake you violently, and just see what shakes out. And apparently, the prayer of Satan was not refused, but he had to ask. And so, the sifting that is coming it is by divine permission. Here's another thing that's fascinating to me. Jesus said, Simon, Simon, behold, Satan hath desired to have you, that he may sift you as wheat. But I have prayed for thee, that thy faith fail not. And when thou art converted, strengthen the brethren. Luke 22, 31 and 32. That's amazing. I mean, here you've got a man and Simon, Peter. Satan has prayed to God to have him so that he might destroy him. Christ is praying to God in order that his faith may not waver. And so you've got Satan, you've got Christ. They're both praying to God in behalf of this one man. Well, you know, the Lord knew that Peter was going to fail. He told Peter. Peter said, I'll never deny, I'll die with you, I'll never deny you. And he said, Peter, he said, before the rooster crows twice tonight, you will have denied me 3 times. And Peter, of course, argued vehemently, said it would never happen. So he knew that Peter was going to fail. But he knew Peter was not going to fail utterly or completely. He knew Peter was going to make a mistake, but he knew Peter was going to recover. Because he says, afterward, when you are converted, or in other words, when you have returned, he said, strengthen the brethren. Well, I think that there's nothing peculiar, really, about the case of Peter. Satan desired to have him. Satan desires to have you. And just as Christ prayed for Peter, Christ prays for you. We're told in Hebrews 4 and verse 15, he is our high priest. What's the duty of a priest? To make intercession with God in behalf of God's children. We're told in 1 John 2 and verse 1, he is our advocate. What is the role of an advocate? Satan is our accuser, and Jesus is our advocate. He pleads our case before God. And so, in your hour of crisis, in your hour of temptation, you will find strength in prayer. And not only in prayer, but in the very realization that Christ is praying for you. Jesus warns that the devil is relentless and he will assault our faith. And therefore he says, be thou faithful unto death. Be thou faithful even to the point of dying. And he said, I will give you everlasting life. You will inherit that wonderful home in heaven. Well, you know, the threat of death. Every apostle, with the exception of John, died a violent death because of their faith. And since that time, the soil of this earth has been saturated with the blood of untold numbers of martyrs. One of the earliest about which we know was a man by the name of Polycarp in AD 167. Polycarp, a follower of Christ, he was given the option, if you'll blaspheme Christ, we'll let you live. But if not, we will execute you. And Polycarp says, how can I blaspheme my king who has saved me? And they warned him, we've got wild beasts. Polycarp said, bring them on. They said, we'll burn you alive at the stake. And he said, the fire with which you burn me will last only for a moment, and then it will be extinct. But what you are ignorant of is that in the judgment there is a fire for the ungodly that is unending. And they burned him alive at the stake. Beneath the city of Rome, there is a long succession of subterranean streets and galleries that have been quarried out of the stratification of rock and soil in that land. And, they're open now to tourists. You can go down there and look around. And they are remarkable. They're wonderful, really. They're the most astonishing cemeteries in the world. They're called the catacombs, and they are the burial places of the martyrs of the early church. When John wrote this letter to Smyrna, people were being carried into the catacombs. And they were taken in there and planted from the torturing rack, from the stake where they were burned alive. And I'm convinced that they were carried and placed in those catacombs with sorrow and tears, and yet with the firm confidence that there was life beyond the catacombs, life beyond the torturing rack, life beyond the stake. Sometimes it's easy to look back. Phyllis and I, a few years ago, had the opportunity to see some of the catacombs in Rome. And, you kind of reflect back and you romanticize about it, and, you kind of glamorize the suffering that took place back in that time, and maybe speculate on, what I would have done if I had been there. But I've got a hunch it'd be quite a different story if tonight we were told to lie down upon a bed of nails, or we were told to stretch out our neck over the chopping block. It's doubtful that you and I will ever have to experience anything like that. But the fact of the matter is, we do have to face tribulations. Jesus said so. He said, "Ye shall have tribulations, and they will indeed assault our faith." There's some very serious tribulations. Illness, disease, crippling accidents, the loss of farms, businesses going bankrupt, marital problems, divorce, child abuse, drug abuse, alcoholism, and on and on. These are very serious tribulations, and they can have a devastating effect upon our faith. They can cause us to wonder if there really is a God out there, if He really is listening to us. It can cause us to question our trust in Him, and it can destroy any initiative that we have to be loyal to His Word. In addition to these very serious tribulations, we all have tribulations that are minor in their degree. They're not critical within themselves, but they kind of snowball and pile up, and eventually they can assault our faith. I'm not really sure how long. It's been several years ago. I was conducting a gospel meeting in southern Missouri, the Ozarks part of the country, and one of the brethren and I were out riding around one day, and he was just, he took me out to a school in the country, and he wanted to introduce me to his sister, who was a school teacher. And so we went inside, we went to her classroom, and went in. I don't really remember for sure, I think it was the third grade. But we went in, and he introduced me to his sister, and then she in turn introduced me to the class, and she told the class, she said, since Mr. Johnson is a preacher, maybe we can get him to read something to us. And they all said, "Hey, yeah, great, sure." And I'll tell you what, I faced some pretty tough audiences in my experience. I'm not sure I was prepared for this bunch. But anyhow, she handed me a little children's book, and it was about a youngster named Alexander. I don't know if they have that children's book anymore, but the story was about his having had a terrible, horrible, no good very bad day, and he had resolved to escape by going to Australia. And I read, there were lima beans for dinner, and I hate limas. There was kissing on TV, and I hate kissing. My bath was too hot. I got soap in my eyes. My marble went down the drain, and I had to wear my railroad train pajamas. I hate my railroad train pajamas. When I went to bed, Nick took back the pillow. He said I could keep. The Mickey Mouse nightlight burned out, and I bit my tongue. The cat wants to sleep with Anthony, not with me. It's been a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. My mom says some days are like that, even in Australia. You ever have a day like that? Oh, we've all had days like that. I think I had one Wednesday. I can tell you one in particular, though. And it was so memorable. I mean, it's been 30 years. I was having some health issues, and it all turned out to be nothing really, but I didn't know at the time. And so I had a bunch of tests to run, and I got about halfway through those tests. I had to fly to California to hold a gospel meeting and had the other half waiting on me when I was going to get back home. I was in my 40s, early 40s. And you got to understand, young folks, this was in the days before the internet. It was before cell phones. It was before texting. It was before email. It was before any kind of social media. Now, I don't know if you can envision that or not. That's the way it was. You know, I'd go off on a meeting, be gone a week or two. I couldn't call Phyllis on the phone or text her every day. Usually what I'd do is I'd get out there and I would ask the brother with whom I would be staying if I could borrow his phone and make a collect phone call. And that'd be it usually. If I was going a week, 10 days, however long. And you know what we did? We wrote each other letters, snail mail. I remember Barney Owens told me one time, he said, man, when I've been gone a week or two, I'd much rather get a letter than a phone call, because he said you could read that letter over and over and over again. It was a precious commodity. When I got out there to California, I borrowed the phone and called Phyllis and told her I'd made it safely. And you know, there I was in my 40s. It seemed like my body was falling apart on me. And I had a bunch of, I didn't feel good really, and had a bunch of tests waiting on me when I got home. I thought, man, if I'm going to go, I'm not going to go without a fight. So I got on my sweats and my running shoes. I went down to a local school that had a football field and a track around it. I jogged a couple of miles, did great, felt great, until I got up the next morning and my hip was inflamed. I don't know if it was bursitis or what, but I could hardly walk if I pivoted incorrectly. It's like somebody was sticking a knife in my hip. And I thought, well, now this is great. So I limped around a day or two, and I came down with a bladder infection, and I thought, man, this can't get any worse. Here I am, 1,500 miles from home. I'm so homesick, I can hardly stand myself. I feel terrible. I don't know what's wrong with me. And I thought, well, I think if I just call Phyllis, maybe get a little sympathy, I think maybe I might feel better. So I asked the brother if I could borrow his phone, and he said, yeah, and I made a call home. Now, we didn't have no caller ID, and so she didn't know who was calling. And when she answered the phone, she sounded like she was out of breath, and she tersely said, hello. I said, what? I said, hey, how you doing? And she said, not too good. She said, the refrigerator just went out. And she said, I'm trying to salvage what I can out of the refrigerator. I'm taking it next door to Mrs. Collier's house. And she's going to share a room with me. And I'm doing the best I can. And we'll try to get it taken care of. And she said, you know, I'm glad you called, because she said, the van won't start. She said, I cannot get the van started. I don't know what's wrong. She said, I'm afraid to drive the car because it continues to make that thumping noise up on the right front wheel. And she said something else. David was going to mow the yard yesterday, but we can't get the lawnmower started. And she said, probably the grass is going to be a foot high when you get home. And the commode off of our bedroom has stopped too. There's something wrong with it. And David has a virus. And he missed school yesterday. He's going to miss his football game tomorrow. And she said, you know, Corey's got that neck and shoulder football injury. And the therapy is more than we expected, and there's a problem with the insurance. She said, you've got several letters piled up on your desk, and they look important to me. But she said, I don't want you to worry, though. I've got plenty of clear liquids in castor oil for your tests when you get home. But I do think I better tell you that when you get home, we're going to have company. She said, how are you? Oh, man, all I could think of was Alexander. It had been a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. Now, none of those were serious within themselves, but they snowball on you. And it makes you irritable, impatient, sarcastic, cynical. It can affect your family relations, your church relations, and it can assault your faith. But whether it's a very serious tribulation or whether it's, minor tribulations that have accumulated, you need to keep a couple of things in mind. One is that every human has problems, all of us. Now, I know there's a tendency to think we're unique. The old spiritual, nobody knows the trouble I see. Well, that's not true. I had a very dear friend who lived in California, and he died over 30 years ago. But he made some bad choices in his life, and he became an alcoholic. But he hit rock bottom, and he decided he was going to do something about it, and he started going to AA. In fact, he got stopped by the police for driving under the influence, and it was given him the option. You can go to AA, and you can do something about this, or you can go to jail. So he went to AA. He was resentful about it. He said he didn't want to go over there with a bunch of drunks because he wasn't a drunk. He got over there and he found out that he was. I went with him. And I went because I wanted to educate myself, and I wanted to be a support for him. And it was really an eye-opener. We got there were people there, doctors, lawyers, accountants, janitors, construction, people from all stratifications of society. They were there. And as we began, we started going around the room, and they would speak up one after the other and say, hi, my name is Bob, and I'm an alcoholic. And everybody would say, hi, Bob. My name is Joe, and I'm an alcoholic. Hi, Joe. And it'd go all the way around the room. It came to me, and I said, my name is Carl. And there was a long pause of silence. And they looked at me as if to say, now, boy, if you don't admit this thing, you're not ever going to get any better. But anyhow, and then finally they'd say, well, hi, Carl. And but I sat there and I listened. Now, these are people from every walk of life. And they would begin to talk about what led them to become an alcoholic and what they experience as they try to stay sober one day at a time. And it became pretty obvious to me pretty quickly that every story that was told was the same story. Just different people, different circumstances, but it was the same story. Well, you may be thinking tonight, well, I'm unemployed, and if I could just get a job, I wouldn't have any problems. Well, the fact is, employed people have problems. They may hate their job. They may hate their hours. They may hate their boss. I mean, they're obviously smarter than their boss. You may be thinking, well, if I could just retire, I wouldn't have any problem. Retired people have problems. They may have money problems. They may have health problems. They may have problems with boredom. The fact is that the only ones not having any problems in the world are dead. And so if you're having problems, that means that you are alive and you're in the same boat with the rest of us. Every human has problems. But another thing, every problem has a limited lifespan. Real quick, what were you worried about 1 year ago? Well, now some of you may remember. I don't, but some of you may. 1 Peter 5 and verse 10 says, "But the God of grace, who hath called us unto his eternal glory by Christ Jesus, after that you have suffered a while, make you perfect, establish, strengthen, settle you." Notice, after you have suffered a while. Jesus told the church at Smyrna, you will have tribulation, 10 days. That's a figure, a symbolic word. It means a measured time, a brief one. It's not forever. And so you can look any problem in the eyes and confidently say to yourself, this too shall pass. The Bible says, weeping may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning. Now keep in mind, this is not going to change, this is not going to solve your problems. Those problems are not going to vanish. But if you can do this, keep in mind that we all have problems, and every problem has a limited lifespan. You can cope. And if you can cope, you can remain faithful. Jesus warns us that storms are going to come into every life. You know, the Lord never really seemed too interested in giving us an easy time of it here. In his prayer in John 17 with his disciples, he prayed to God, I'm not asking you, Father, to carry them into the skies on flowery beds of ease. I'm just asking that you keep the world out of them enough that they can remain faithful. The father proudly said, I'm going to see to it that my boy doesn't have as hard a time as I've had. And I think all fathers probably feel like that. But you know what? If he's not careful, he can cheat that boy out of the very thing that has made him the good and the strong man that he is. Because it's never the easy times that produce our heroes. It's the tough times. Anyone can make it through the calm, but it is the storms of life that test us. It is in the fiery trial that we develop our best virtues. We've all heard the old saying, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. I've also heard that when the pressure is on, some people break and others break records. I like that one. But the storms are going to come into every life. Maybe the loss of a spouse, loss of a child, the loss of a job, the loss of a parent. We don't know what form that they will take, but the rain will come and the streams will rise and the wind will blow and it will beat on our house of faith. And whether it stands or whether it falls depends upon where it's been built. The psalmist said, some trust in chariots and others trust in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God. And if you can say that, that can give you strength and faith for the struggle.